All right, hello and welcome to part 3 of this free training where I'm going to just talk about OCD, OCD treatment, OCD recovery, and I'm really trying to answer some of the main questions that I get, from clients on a day-to-day basis. And so in this particular training, I'm going to talk about this idea of how do I stop bad thoughts, right? This is a question that I get nearly every day, and it's a question that is really important because when you're first starting out in recovery, that seems to be everyone's main goal. Like, how do I stop the thoughts that I'm having, right? I don't like the thoughts. I want them to go away because when I have them, I get anxious, and then when I get anxious, I do compulsions. When I do compulsions, I get trapped in this loop. So if I make the thoughts go away, all this problem should be resolved. That's obviously the logic that goes into it. And while it's good logic and it's sound as far as like a problem solving, the thing is that OCD doesn't operate in logic, right? And so how we actually address thoughts is by addressing how we react to them so that we don't reinforce the idea that the thought is good or bad or dangerous or whatever. And then by us not reacting to it, what we do is we then habituate to the idea of experiencing the thought or the anxiety the thought generates, and then what then happens is that our brain learns that that thought's not really important. We don't need to be worried about it, so that the thoughts ultimately diminish. So it's kind of backwards how we attack it, but ultimately we have the most control over our behavior, right? Because when we talk about this idea of trying to control your thoughts or control how you feel, the reality is that human beings, we just don't have that capability to control every thought that pops in our head or control every emotion we experience because a lot of things are triggered externally, and which is obviously beyond our control. So part of the treatment process is we want to focus on what we can control. And because, the question of how do I stop my thoughts or how do I stop these bad thoughts? How do I get rid of these thoughts? I hear all the time. One of the things that I want to talk about is a study that was really interesting that was done about this idea of white bears. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, a social psychologist by the name of Daniel Wegner did these studies on, he would have his participants get into a room and he would basically tell them the following. He would say, okay, look, for the next, let's say 10 minutes, I don't know the exact time, but you're not allowed to think of a white bear. You can do anything else, but don't think of a white bear. And what he found is that even you can try it right now, wherever you are, you can close your eyes real quick, and just kind of, hey, try not to think of a white bear for the next 5 seconds. And what you'll find is that the more and more you try to not have a thought or try to push thoughts away, that ultimately it actually creates those thoughts more and more in your head, so you experience them more. So exactly what you're doing to try to stop the thoughts is actually making the thoughts come back more and more, and so and that's exactly what Daniel Wegner found in his studies of the white bear, is his participants kept saying how the more they tried not to think about the white bear, the more the thought popped up in their head. And again, one of the things I want to point out about the study is that white bears were pretty neutral as far as the kind of thoughts that they were having, right? They didn't provoke any anxiety or whatnot. So when we talk about OCD and we have thoughts that are extremely anxiety provoking or extremely painful to experience, trying to push those thoughts away even amplifies that, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of phenomenon as well, right? And so when we talk about trying to push thoughts away, we need to realize that that's actually going to make them worse, which is going to increase OCD, which is going to increase anxiety and your desire to do compulsions as well. So that is one of the key things that I want to point out in this training, is that by trying to stop thoughts, you're actually going to make them worse. So one of the things, in order to stop thoughts though, the paradox is, by accepting thoughts and not reacting to them in compulsive ways, what we ultimately do is we train our brain to understand that these aren't thoughts we need to be worried about. These aren't thoughts that are threatening. And because your brain is designed in a way to serve you and to do things to help you, the thoughts themselves will ultimately decrease the more accepting we become of them. So that's this huge paradox with OCD, is this idea that if you want to stop your thoughts, you almost have to be willing to accept their presence in the first place and not try to stop them, right? And you can't do this whole thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to accept it so that it goes away, because that doesn't work either, because again, you're still doing something to try to make it go away. And I guess the point I want to make in this particular training is that trying to control your thoughts and trying to suppress them is a compulsion, and it's actually going to make them worse. And so one of the things that we need to do in order to address thoughts that we don't like or feelings that we don't want to have is actually become more accepting of their presence and stop trying to control and push and suppress them, so that we actually allow ourselves to experience them and we habituate to their presence, and that we learn that they're not something that we need to react to. And by doing that, then you'll see their presence slowly diminish over time, because they're not going to be something that you need to push away. And so hopefully that makes sense. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but to really summarize this whole training is really the idea that, look, the more you try to push thoughts away, the more you're going to experience them. And you can read up and remember the white bear study of trying to push that thought away, and realizing that by pushing thoughts away, it's actually going to make things worse. But where you actually, the more accepting you become of their presence, and the less and less you try to do anything about them, the less and less you'll ultimately experience them down the road. And so that concludes this little section of the training. And then again, if you like this, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, comment below, and then I will see you over in the next part of the training. Also, I have some resources that I've linked below, so be sure to click on those or visit my website at www.ocdacademy.com, where I have some more resources to help you on your journey to recovery from OCD. So I'll see you over in the next training.